Well, hello, folks. Welcome back to a special edition here, actually, of the Texas SignalCast. We are interviewing two very special guests today, two guys I've known for a really long time here in Texas politics, Manny Garcia and Cliff Walker, two former members of the Texas Democratic Party leadership. And today we're just going to be chatting about their experience over the last decade in Texas politics and what we kind of have to look forward to. And eventually we're going to turn the state blue. There's absolutely no question. But these guys have sort of the tools and strategies that we can look forward to actually doing that with. So thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us. Glad you're on.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, you guys want to start and tell us a little bit about, how you kind of see over the last decade and sort of your personal experience. Let folks know who you are and what you guys been doing for the last 10 years or so I've known you.
Yeah. So, the quick story on me. I say I went from academia to the policy world to straight political hackery. In my time, I was an education policy researcher at UT Austin, and in the 2007 legislative session, started interacting with members of the legislature to bring research to bear in the policy world there. Over time, got the Capitol bug and wanted to go and work inside the building. So in 2010, I joined the staff of Trey Martinez Fisher, became the director of policy for the Mexican American Legislative Caucus, worked on a number of different PACs and carried a lot of different hats for a while. And then came to the state party for the 2014 election cycle as communications director, and then been with the state party up to the 2020 election cycle. So it was starting on this sense of research and making sure that we could do better work for kids in schools and dropout prevention, and really all along just getting frustrated with the pace of things and wanting to change more things. And we do this work because we find change in politics. It works. And if we go fight hard, we can deliver change for people.
I would have thought you were always a political animal, Manny. I didn't realize you had come the full circle. But that's great. Obviously we need that kind of, experience and people realizing it's actually a lot more than about winning elections. The ultimate goal is actually to produce better policy. So, but we got to win these elections to get there. Cliff, you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Well, I did not come from academia, which I understand is also a little political. The world itself can be a bit political. I've been just a pure hack all the way through and through, and had the great fortune to hack around with a lot of really cool individuals as candidates, as elected officials, with organizations. Just sort of working our way backwards. I had been with the state party until recently, for going on about 6 years. I joined the party originally to kick off the candidate support program, and then had an opportunity to chime in on a lot of other things, dealing with the broader strategy of the party. But prior to that, I helped kick off Battleground Texas in the 2013 cycle. I ran our House caucus or House Democratic Campaign Committee, the campaign side of things, not the policy side, in the 2012 cycle. Helped kick off a PAC called Back to Basics in 2010, which was actually I've enjoyed much of what I've done. And I would say my time at the party was definitely the high point of enjoyment. But, calling Rick Perry a coward for refusing to debate Bill White in 23 major newspapers on one single day and full page ads, that was a lot of fun. And creating some websites to really just give the lie to what the Republicans are doing was a lot of fun. But prior to that, I worked with some state legislators and a member of Congress. But the bulk of my work has been in infrastructure building.
Yeah, I think that's really a great segue into really the first question to me is just like over the last decade or so that you're talking about since 2012, how has the infrastructure of the party sort of evolved and changed? We've had sort of the same idea, the message of turning Texas blue for a very long time. And, there are political realities that are there. So can you talk a little bit about sort of how you see that evolving us into an actual battleground state?
A really dramatic change in Texas over the course of the decade. I think a lot of folks have always seen the population potential of Texas and what you could do with the raw number, but the resources for the infrastructure necessary to make that happen, the talent, the relationships, the programming, all of that wasn't quite there. But there's been a lot of folks working really hard to build that over the years. And you got some outstanding progressive organizations that dedicated themselves to different regions of Texas. You got a professionalization in a number of different areas. You had the strength of the labor movement increase in Texas, Texas being one of the states that increases membership, that you don't see that across the country. And then at the Democratic Party, you had a complete overhaul of what the Texas Democratic Party was, from an organization that had a handful of staff. And I'll say most state parties in the country actually always have a handful of staff. They might grow a little bit larger during an election, but most state parties in the country don't run independently crafted program. They don't recruit the kind of people that can work on presidential campaigns. They don't have the kinds of resources for those kinds of things. But the Texas Democratic Party became a destination for a lot of talented operatives to do their work, to do their craft. And we were very excited to have over 200 staff in the 2020 election cycle, expending more than $25 million in resources to help turn Texas blue, which has been a pretty dramatic increase over the past several years. But there's still lots more work to do. When you compare that to what we see Republicans being able to do and pull together through their super PACs and their institutions, and even just Greg Abbott's campaign alone, it becomes very clear that Texas has the potential to turn blue. It is on the right trajectory to turn blue. Now we need to make sure that the resources are there to turn it blue. But I've been excited that over our years, and we've been able to work with a really impressive group of progressive allies and sit at the table and have tough conversations about where we make our movement, where we grow our movement. And really there's so much alignment now about how we want to go and the communities we want to invest in.
Yeah, that's the. I'm going to credit Adrian Bell, who is our Democratic nominee in a congressional district that extends from the Galveston area for the past couple of cycles. But she tweeted something last week. I'm going to attribute this to her, give her full credit. Turning Texas blue is not an event; it's a process, and that has been a lesson that I think many of those who are continuing this work at the allied level, at the not just the state level progressive organizations or the national organizations, but local volunteers, candidates who have run in districts that are, have historically been upside down in terms of Democratic performance, who have run a great personal sacrifice. And after a hard election said, you know what, I've built up some political capital, I'm going to run again. And I'm going to take my district that was 75% Democratic, and after my first race, 75% Republican. After my first race, I bumped up from 25% Democratic to 30%. After my second race, I bumped that up to 35%. And all of that contributes not just to our overall statewide total, but to our viability as a party in all 8,000 or so precincts in this state.
Yeah, and so that's a lot of what, and I've seen that the number of organizations on the ground, even local, almost like autonomous organizations that are starting up, organizing. But what about the money? We've also talked a lot about how Texas has been, sort of a bank for other campaigns outside of the state, taking not just our talent but the money. How have you seen that change over the years in terms of the investments now being made in Texas and what we need to do to get more of that investment in Texas?
Yeah. Well, two things. I think we've seen now, the ability of both candidates and organizations to raise significant amount of grassroots dollars. We go back to 2014 and Wendy Davis's race and being able to raise significant resources from grassroots donations. You see Beto O'Rourke's outstanding race for United States Senate and being able to raise significant resources from regular Texans, given their $5 because they believed in the change that the state needed, but also from folks across the country and gravitating towards Texas and the promise that that is here. And at the Texas Democratic Party, our list has grown dramatically since 2014. We raised more money online than any state party in the country by more than double. It's still not enough. You need additional resources on top of that. But I think it's shown that thousands and thousands of volunteers, not just in Texas but across the country, see Texas as this beacon of hope for democratic progressive politics and change of what can happen in the future. And that's been critical to set up the base of the kind of work that you can do, right? When we were at the party and we could talk to a donor and say, you're not paying for salaries, you're paying for program expansion, because generous grassroots donors have sustaining memberships month to month to make sure that we have staff covered. Now we're looking for program expansions. Now we're looking to do more. That is a powerful conversation to be able to have. And I'll tell you this cycle, and in particular, just the last few years, you've been starting to see, donors with more capacity, and a different generation of donors, maybe pull back a little bit from giving resources to that U.S. Senate race across the country, and saying, well, I'll invest some more here, and try to keep that here at home. And I think that's really that's going to be what's important moving forward. Is we're going to need to make sure that national committees are backing us up in that message when they have conversations with their Texas donors, that there is real promise in Texas, and that we need to invest resources here and keep it here at home.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering about expectations, and there's a lot of expectations on 2020. Texas Democrats potentially flipping the House, and obviously without the expectations, without the energy, we'll never be able to do it. It's sort of the chicken egg scenario. How do we set proper expectations moving into these cycles so that we can keep those donors invested in Texas?
Yeah. Thought a lot about this, and Manny and I have both been around, and Joe, you've been around in Texas politics a long while too. And we've had some elections that have gone pretty well, and some that have been disappointing. I think the thing that here's the thing: I sleep very well at night, knowing that we put forward a strong effort, that we said that Texas was going to be the biggest battleground state. That never meant that we're going to be a blue state. We got a ways to go before we're there. I think what's different about 2020 from some of the other elections where we might not have gotten all we wanted is that folks that I've engaged with maybe a little bruised, but they're not broken. After one election, I remember a number of folks who were contributors said, I'm locking up my wallets, I'm closing my purses, I'm putting away the checkbooks for a little bit. The volunteers were kind of in despair. We put forward all this effort. We had, the expectation that we would perform significantly better. But after this election, obviously there's plenty of room for reflection, and Manny and I have certainly thought a lot about it. And there's a whole process that's back at our former employer that's going to issue a report, and they're going through that whole process, and we'll let them do their work. But the conversations that I've had with people who've contributed, whether it's $5 or $5,000, the people who contributed their time, there's still an enthusiasm about competing in this state. The national committees, who may not have been as prompt to return our phone calls in previous cycles, are still just as excited about Texas as before. Man, you mentioned Tom Paris.
The week after the election, Tom Paris is on MSNBC with Chris Hayes, and he's reflecting on the change of the electoral map, the victory in Georgia, the victory in Arizona, and he said, take it to the bank. Texas is a battleground state in 2024. We've come a long way. We've come a long way from the times when the Democratic National Committee, frankly, was telling people to not invest in Texas and to take their money to other places, and pretty much not picking up the phone when Texas called, to a strong collaboration during the 2020 cycle. More resources than had ever existed there before. Not as much as what was necessary, or not as much compared to other battleground states, but a start. To, at the end of the election, saying Texas actually moved up on the board of battleground states, and based on that map, that we are a destination for 2024 work. And so that's incredibly exciting to see that national partners now see what's possible in Texas. Now, a lot of our folks have known what's possible in Texas for a lot of years. We've been putting in a ton of work. Folks have been working hard, and like Cliff said, giving those $5, those conversations, those knocking on the doors, and getting on the phone call, sending the text messages. I know there is, we get frustrated, and we get frustrated going at it cycle after cycle. But it's been amazing to see the kind of progress that has happened. And right after the election, a group of really incredible organizers from Texas went out to Georgia, and went to go help out in Georgia. They picked up a win there and came back, and I just love seeing all those tweets right after Georgia that said, now Texas is next, right? I think people understand that the future of the Democratic Party is a diverse coalition of folks, and that diverse coalition can be found in the South and the Southwest, across the Sun Belt, and Texas has that to offer.
Yeah, I mean, and really the time that you guys have been there, the margin has closed tremendously, to the point of where we're getting to the margin of error, about 5% with Biden, I believe it was. But so, I mean, the progress is there, and the opportunity to pick up seats. I mean, we've obviously picked up seats in Congress and things like that. So I guess, looking sort of ahead, how do we take that next leap forward in closing that gap from 5 to 2, or flipping it completely? What are sort of the next, where's the growth for the party? Where should we be looking?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak about what the party should do, the lowercase p party. One thing that we always said when we were at the state party is that, if by party we mean the couple hundred staffers who are in Austin, distributed now actually across the country, given our pandemic circumstances, then we can't be successful. But the party, the movement broadly, is inclusive of allied organizations. It's inclusive of every single volunteer, every person out there who shares our values, or a person of conscience on the other side who's open to voting for the side of right. So in that respect, looking at it broadly, we've kind of talked a little bit around this, but I want to hit specifically on one particular level of infrastructure that we lose. We lose at times donor resources when people aren't optimistic about our chances in Texas. But we also lose a lot of staff capacity. We lose folks who, say, I'm going to go work in a competitive state, like Arizona's, the Colorado's, now Georgia, and then some of the traditional states as well. We have years of, candidly, brain drain over the last decade, and that's begun to be reversed in the last several cycles. Now we've got folks who are, what was exciting about last time, we certainly want to make sure that, the heart of our talent, and we have a core team that has sort of deep experience with Texas, but there are new Texans as well. There are plenty of people who said, the old David Crockett line, you all may go to hell, I'll go to Texas, and got here as quick as I could and got to work. And, what's exciting is that many of these people have now, bought condos and partnered up and starting families, and now this is home, and they want to continue building this broader movement. But that was an important layer of infrastructure that I don't think really gets talked about as such. I think continuing to make Texas a magnet for talent, continuing to assert that Texas is a viable opportunity for Democrats. It was interesting following folks on Twitter during the freeze and our frozen hellscape that the state leaders at the moment failed to fix in time. And there was a little bit of schadenfreude across the country. Some folks who were saying, well, this is what happens when you elect the people that you elect Texas. It wasn't a lot of folks, but there was some of it. But the counterpoint to that, the groundswell of people in the state, outside the state, saying, actually, no, Texas is a bit more democratic than you think. There are a lot of folks there who are, Texas Democrats. Maybe they don't look identical to Democrats in every other state, but there are certainly folks who would fight for a more competent government, who believe that there should be a role for government, that maybe we shouldn't let entire industries self-regulate on a just-in-time supply model, and let's see what happens when there's no incentive to actually prepare for the climate changes and the challenges that we know that we're all confronting, that there are inevitable results from that, and we ought to do better than that. And it was really heartening just to see that reaffirmed, not just in Texas, but across.
And I'll say, you asked like what will it take to turn blue? It's those folks that when government utterly failed, Republican government utterly failed, you had progressives across the entire state of Texas. All of those folks who are those dedicated volunteers on Democratic campaigns mobilize into action. You saw clubs and county parties, mutual aid organizations, former campaign staffers come together. Saw a bunch of the progressive allied organizations, the labor movement, and begin to distribute food, distribute water, just get to action to help take care of people. While they were also taking care of their own homes and having to deal with that as well. And I think that just goes to show the resilience and the promise of what we have here, is that folks deeply care about Texas. There is this unique character of our team and how we care about our homes and our communities. And we have understood that it is under threat and under attack by a Republican state government that doesn't give a damn about people. And what I hope is that national entities and people of means will bring resources to Texas to back up those folks, those volunteers and those staffers who are working their hearts out to make a difference and to make a change, and those candidates who are putting their names on the ballot and running in a race that maybe looks too far away, but they're pushed it 5 points closer in a very short time span. And you're seeing these in dozens of districts across the state, just moving rapidly towards a toss-up margin. So it takes resources, and like Cliff said, it takes that talent, and you got to get the resources to back up that talent. And sadly, it has been too few for way too many years.
Yeah, I mean, that really brings up the next point, which is about candidates themselves, recruitment, and the message that they're carrying, because along with side of all of these volunteers that were out there trying to basically replace the government that didn't exist. We had like local officials and county judges and city council members that are really actually progressive. Some run on the D platform and others are nonpartisan races, but they are targeted by our state Republicans as progressives. How do we show in contrast that like we're out there rolling up our sleeves, making things work, fixing things, in contrast to the government that we have in place now that has let it break by design? How do we make that contrast and show that, the side that really cares about Texas and our community is the one that's rolling up its sleeves and making government work?
Yeah,
you know, take a step.
I was thinking about you, Cliff, for a second, because Cliff came to the party originally to start Project Lift, where he started a program that was novel in the Democratic world, that even in a nonpartisan race, we're gonna start helping progressive candidates, and it really started to change the sentiment of what we get into, and where do we put our emphasis, because now we cared about city council and school board. And Cliff, I mean, you should share that, like, these folks have really developed over years, right?
Yeah, there are people who participated in the program. I think to date, we're somewhere around, parties probably helped elect around 70 or so local candidates. Urban, suburban, rural, the majority are, say, probably about 50-50 women, maybe a slight majority of women, and definitely predominantly people of color. And it was really interesting kicking it off. And I'm very fortunate that the party was there. Manny was in leadership at the time. Crystal Perkins, our former executive director, was in leadership, and of course the chair. I had this idea. We spent a lot of money in 2014 working on building up a brand for a statewide candidate. And occasionally there was a competitive congressional in the state. Back in the old days, it wasn't anything like what we had last cycle, where you had the DCCC setting up shop in Texas because there's such a concentration of opportunity. But maybe there was one district, but a lot of the work was in Texas legislative races. We always had trouble finding candidates to run for some of these state house races. People who had developed their own personal brand, who had developed a volunteer base or a base of donors, who had maybe done some work in their local community and shown up on local TV. So some voters had a general familiarity with them. That had not really existed. I was talking with a friend who's not someone that someone that we've worked with a lot in the past. He said, that's a great idea, but that's always fifth or sixth on everyone's list. We have all these other things to do, and someone ought to do it. And the party ended up being a place that welcomed that kind of innovation. And I joined and had very high expectations for what I was going to put up as part of this like little subsidiary of the party. And I want to run the program this way, and I want to make sure that I'm raising money so that I've got some say into the direction of this effort. And I'll always be appreciative to give credit to our former boss, Manny's predecessor, Crystal, who said, okay, sure. And then at the end of the day, building a program took a lot of time, and didn't have the time to raise the money that I thought it would raise, and it just became a core offering of the party, which is ultimately what it should be. We talk about running everywhere, and I do think that we should have a Democratic champion in every precinct, every neighborhood in the state. But I think it's important that we're not just putting names on ballots, and that was part of the change that I think we helped to shepherd. How can we make it just a little bit easier to run? We can't fund every campaign in the state. We could not at the state party. Even if you compliantly could, and if someone had a couple $1 billion to fund all the races, I don't think it's necessarily the right thing to do. But what we could do is make sure that it's not simply let's just have a name on the ballot so there's a quote unquote alternative, but someone who's actively talking to voters, who's going to the town hall, hosting their own town halls, going to debates with the other side that occasionally doesn't even show up. It's filling out questionnaires, that's calling, texting, knocking those doors. Because candidly, we've got a brand challenge as the Democratic Party. When people say, I agree with a lot of the stuff that you said, when I like the features and benefits, but I don't like the brand, that's a brand problem. And the way that we're going to fix that is we need representatives of that brand who are just like me, just like every single community, that any of us have the opportunity to be representatives of the party and to be to embody the values that we want to show. And the best way to do that is with, in my opinion, with local candidates. Even in nonpartisan races, there are plenty of folks who are progressive elected around the state who don't have Democrats stamped on their foreheads. But when it comes down to it, they're passing progressive policy, and they're making sure that when we do have a need to mobilize voters, that they're contributing political power to that project. So it's been one of the most fulfilling things I've had an opportunity to work on, and I will be eternally grateful to the party for that opportunity.
You know, these folks are getting things done. They're fixing sidewalks and they're making schools better, and it's that ability to see progressives and Democrats getting something done that's where we can find our path forward. Because right now, in this pandemic and in the freeze, you saw county judges and mayors, city council members step up to the plate as state government was just completely not a partner and fighting them every step of the way. But you had these really strong Democrats like Lena Hidalgo showing what happens when you open the doors of government, when you get things done, when you care about people first. And they were delivering solutions to folks in the middle of a incredibly hard circumstances. And now that we have a federal government that is Democratic, you see these partnerships of Democratic cities align with the federal government, delivering resources, making sure we get vaccines out to folks, moving quickly, even if state government is an impediment. We need to continue to talk about those things. We need to continue to talk about the very practical things that change people's daily lives, right? It's not so much the conversation on cable news and whatever the hell DC thinks is interesting today. It's that we're actually delivering resources to your family to fundamentally improve your life. Of the fair shot agenda that Texas labor has really backed and pioneered. That is our path forward. You look at the across the entire country. Yes, Democrats won, and we held Congress, and thank God we're here, and we have saved the union from the brink here. But that work's not over. that is still sort of there, an environment. We have a Republican Party that is inspiring and in many ways actively supporting insurrectionists and white supremacists, and that's not going away anytime soon. Mm-hmm. And in the policy realm, you have all of these obstacles that make it harder for people to vote and harder for people to participate in the future of their government and in their communities. And they're still going after it today. The Texas legislature is in session, and you will hear controversy day after day about the kinds of things that they're going to do to try to silence your vote. But we need a progressive democratic movement in Texas and across the entire country that is going to stand up to all of that and be able to deliver solutions to the things that you care about every single day, as well as those things that you don't even know are around the corner. And it's got to be grounded in these values. If you're looking at polling, you need to see that poll about does the Democratic Party care about people like me? You need to see that thing skyrocket. That's what we need to see shift, and in order to make those things that shift happen, it's a lot of hard fundamental work, conversations with people, and showing that, look at what just happened and look at how a Democrat delivered.
I'm glad you mentioned the fair fight agenda, because it reminds me of a campaign I ran here in the city of Austin for civil service for all city of Austin employees. And we had done some polling, and our tagline was vote for fairness, because, what people do understand, no matter what side of the political aisle you're on, because this was clearly nonpartisan, they understand fairness is a good thing. And when you don't have a great, strong brand, like you mentioned, we don't right now in Texas, I think that's a great place to start. And that's why I was so bullish on, this opportunity during redistricting, that we got to be very strong on redistricting, because it really comes down to, it's about fairness. And if we have that on our side, which we do, then I think it brings more people in, and it allows us to sort of establish that brand. And I've seen that argument work in another way. I'm glad that the unions are pushing this, because I'm from Beaumont, and it used to be a stronghold for labor. It used to be a stronghold for the Democratic Party, because in all those refineries are unionized workers. But over the last, we're starting to come back a little bit, but really over the last 15 years, they've drifted Republican based on social issues and other things, not having to do with making their workplace safer, increasing their wages, or any of that stuff. They've totally sort of bought into all this nonsense you kind of mentioned that the right is pushing. So I guess the question is, how do we expand that beyond labor? And from you guys' experience, are there messages that work tremendously well across the whole state? And then are there messages that are more regional focused that we really need to hone in on?
Before we jump into the specifics of the message frames, I want to go back to something you just mentioned, Joe, and actually expand upon a little bit. I don't think that we simply have a brand challenge here in Texas as a Democratic Party writ large, as a progressive movement. I think that we've got a brand challenge nationally. I think some of the areas of just underperformance on the ballot that we saw in Texas, it rhymes with what we saw in some other states. And actually, in Texas, there are some places where certainly the results are disappointing. I certainly don't want to sugarcoat that. But there are some places where we actually held the floor a little bit higher than in some other states. So this is not a Texas challenge. This is a national challenge. And I think that one of the best ways to get around it is that we've got to show deliverables. Republicans and conservatives have figured this out, that if you can grind government to a halt because you don't want government to do anything. I mean, if you want to provide government in reverse, which is no government, but I give you your money back. If that's your pitch, then you don't need to deliver anything but 1.9 million in tax cuts that are tilted towards the very rich, is what it's a signature accomplishment of the Trump administration. The signature accomplishment of the Biden administration within 100 days has been delivering $1.9 trillion to actually address this virus, to help people recover from what was in a lot of ways a government failure to protect the economy and to protect lives. I think we need to hone in on those examples and those leaders who are delivering at all levels. I'm glad that Manny mentioned Judge Hidalgo. I learned more about what was happening on a day-to-day basis living in Austin from the Harris County judge and from Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins than I did from my own governor. I learned about ways that I could volunteer and participate and contribute towards mutual aid efforts through Greg Casarma, a city council member here, much more than I did anything that came from leadership at the state level. So, I think focusing on deliverables that I can't just put on a mail. It's not that I'm simply putting on a mail piece, say, I got you this, or I'm putting in a TV ad that I got you this, but something that people can feel that actually changes their lives. And crucially, something that they can explain, because the most credible messengers to people are none of the three of us, candidly. The most credible messengers to people for political messaging that really has an impact is your mom, is your dad, is your brother, sister, cousin, people within your personal networks. But the more instances we have of people who can articulate an actual deliverable, I think that's when we can start to see some real progress.
And that just putting a final point on that. I think you have seen with this administration that messaging shift and it resulting in a real focus on the kinds of policies you pushed forward, right? This was about cash in people's pockets. This was about shots in people's arms. This was about making sure if you had lost your job, you can stay on healthcare. This is about making sure that you could economically recover. This is about making sure that those county and city governments weren't going to fall apart as they are seeing the revenue completely, come off the cliff. That they had a way to still proceed forward. and getting those resources out to your local community. And they're doing a fantastic job right now talking about what's in the American Rescue Plan, and making sure that people understand what they just delivered with no Republican votes, by the way, right? Exactly. So, and it won't stop there. We're gonna see a robust conversation about the future of the Voting Rights Act, and who is gonna, just like you said, Joe, who's gonna deliver fairness in you being able to have your voice heard in your community, and who's not. And if Republicans want to vote against the Voting Rights Act, well, they're going to have that fight, and we're going to need Democrats at every single layer of government talking about the importance of that fight. And then it's not going to stop there. We're going to have an infrastructure bill this year, right? There's going to be a robust conversation about infrastructure and investment and jobs and green jobs. And if the Republican Party wants to once again just completely obstruct and not do anything, Democrats are going to be the ones that are delivering jobs in your literal lives and livelihoods, and making sure that we stay concentrated on those things that have daily effect is going to be really critically important.
Yeah, and as we move into 2022, in order to sort of like put all that into practice, what do you guys sort of see as the best advice for those organizers out there who gave it all, everything they had in 2020, and they're looking ahead now? We have our legislature in session. Are there things they could be doing now in preparation for that? Because it's coming quick. Filing deadline is what, December already, right? Of this
December,
year.
yeah.
So
yeah, it is coming.
Yeah, it's coming.
And the fights are being had, right? The legislature's in session. But I'll say two things. One is definitely get involved in the redistricting fight. That fight and testimony on that fight is really important. It's about sharing what your community is experiencing, whether or not government's been responsive to you, and whether or not you need a change in your representative in your district so that your community is not split apart and has the voice that it needs, so that government can be responsive to you. And so that's going to be very important, making sure that these folks don't get away easy on what happened on this blackout, because this was by design. As it was playing out, you heard Rick Perry say, "Oh, I think Texans are okay with suffering through some of this in order to keep the federal government out of energy regulation." Hell no, we're not okay with that. No, we're not. No, we are not okay with some energy company reaping a reward in billions of dollars as people are literally freezing in their homes in a system that was designed to work that way, for that to be okay. Not okay. We need to have our voice heard. We need to push. We need to make sure the legislature is accountable and delivers results on this, on top of all of the other issues in healthcare, in education, in our rights that we're facing, from gun violence to the rights of diverse communities to have some basic fairness and justice. So that's critically important. But at home, in your city, there are critically important things happening as well. Your school board meets every week. Your city council meets every week. Your county commissioners meet. Have your voice heard there as well. Make sure that you're being engaging in those local issues as well. One of the most beautiful things after the 2016 election, when we were all reeling, that it actually happened and Donald Trump had won, was to see the Women's March and to see so many activists start new organizations across the entire state and get involved in their local communities. That is important too, not just the legislature. So making sure that folks have the muscle memory of having their voice heard and working together and having tough conversations about the future of their communities. That's what you build a huge coordinated campaign on for the November general election, is making sure that those relationships exist.
Yeah, the only thing that I'd add to that is that recently, man, I learned that a mutual friend of ours has a pretty interesting theory that everyone at some point in their lives should run for office. Now, that is a bold assertion. I've met many people who, and many of whom who have run for office. Probably met hundreds, if not thousands, of candidates over my life. I've been engaged with them. I'm not convinced that that is true. I'm convinced I agree. Um, but I do think that virtually everyone should be as engaged as they possibly can with some sort of campaign. I think it's certainly participation in the political process. I mean, if you're eligible to vote, you should vote. But I think also being an active participant in the campaign is important. Uh, you know, some of the most credible messengers, some of the most impactful messengers when it comes to talking about this crisis that we've been talking about, this freeze. Now, this is the costliest disaster in Texas history, and it only became so because day after day there were screw ups and screw ups. And I'm not seeing a full report yet. I haven't seen the comptroller's office say this. I've seen this be speculated by very brilliant policy people and researchers, but there's not a lot of gusto among some of our government officials to really give some answers as to what happened. But local folks can be strong messengers in that. I do think that is a defining moment in many of our lives, but I think also within the context of this election, within this election cycle, and the May 1st elections that are coming up, there are plenty of people, everyone's dealing with the fallout of this in some way, whether it's some pipes that burst, whether your roof is caved in, whether you lost a bunch of food, whether you lost a job, whether you're a restaurant that survived a year of the pandemic, but because of their screw ups, you just lost your restaurant. You lost all your inventory, and now you can't afford to soldier on. Right. So the full impact of this has yet to be felt, and it's going to take a whole of government approach to really assess this idea of the Texas miracle being a result of these kinds of policies. Sort of laissez-faire. Just do it on a shoestring. That ought to hold these people. Just toss a little out to the plebs, and that's good enough, right? And the more messengers that we have for running active, highly communicative campaigns, there are over 9,000 positions that are going to be on the ballot on May 1st. Wow. And there'll be runoffs in many places. So in just about every community, you can find a candidate and adopt a candidate. You can get someone reelected who's been a great champion on this and any other issues that you care about. But I'd make a strong pitch for that. No, all due deference to our friends at the legislature. Is crucial that we get engaged on many of the issues that we care about. The bills may live or die based on what happens on election day. Right now, we still have to fight the good fight. We're going to put on pressure, but the range of power that we have, the overall leverage that we have, we gain a lot of that on election day, and that is true also in city councils and school boards.
Yeah, absolutely. I always try to stay involved in local issues. It's kind of easy for me, obviously, like you as a sort of political professional. But there, you can get involved with, boards and commissions. There's all kinds of things which you're interested in. It could be art, it could be parks, it could be just really, there's so many different things, energy, public safety. There's so many different things that you can do to get involved. And then when you start doing that, you realize how the government works and all these pieces kind of fit together and how the state affects what you can do at the local level, even on building housing, affordable housing and things like that. So super important to start those local, because then you'll wake up one day like your friend and realize, well, you know what, maybe it's me that should be running for office. So that definitely happens. So what's it looking like for you guys? Are you guys retired now? Are you writing memoirs? Like what's the play for you guys?
Not that old, Joe.
Okay. I mean, politics ages you, man. I know 10 years in politics is a long time. So
why do you think I shave all this?
Yeah. I got two amazing kids, and I've dedicated a lot of work to my professional career to making some change in this state. And I don't think I'm quite done yet making that change. So taking a lot of time to think about what is necessary to win, and how we can best use our unique skill set and play our part in it. But you know, we'll see how interesting it is down the road. But for me right now, I'm just very happy having the title Texas Democrat. Maybe calling into a phone bank, sending some text messages for folks, and just helping out in my community.
Likewise.
Awesome.
I'm proudly still a sustaining donor of the Texas Democratic Party. I will continue to support my party and to support my local candidates, and it's nice to be on the flip side and just write the check. I might write an email. This is what you got to do. But sure, always welcome. But I think the joys of the work that we've been able to do over the last several years is, we got a chance to work on some of the biggest problems with the smartest people. And how do we keep doing that? There are plenty of problems that, are have different stakeholders, or it may not be, in our previous employment that we were able to work on some of those problems, but they still need fixing, they still need addressing. And figuring out which ones that we've got the wherewithal and capacity, energy and expertise to help take a crack at. I'm enjoying taking a little time to figure that out.
That's good. It's nice. I mean, you guys have a lot to contribute, and we have a lot to learn from your experience. So definitely appreciate you coming on the podcast and kind of, giving us the lowdown from the last pretty much decade of Texas politics and how it's gone, and what we have to do to make it better and eventually flip the state. So we appreciate it. I know we'll be seeing a lot more of you on this, maybe, with the Signal and other places, but appreciate it. And it's always great to chat with you guys and catch up.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you.